So welcome, 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 our beloved and brilliant colleague, Adriana. It's been far too long, and I'm just so excited to build with you and to connect. And as always at SETC, we begin all things by giving thanks to our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Adriana, please share a bit about your remarkable work with our listeners and viewers.
So thank you, Victor, for having me here. It's lovely to be here. And so I was like, oh, share about myself, and I'll try to be succinct somewhat, but I'm known to give long answers to short questions. Um, so I moved to Toronto just over 20 years ago. I had been living and working abroad. And I think with that framing, very motivated in my sense and my upbringing at that point was around community development and civil society. And I was really fortunate to be working overseas on community development and working with civil society in the absence of a strong state to kind of support the strengthening of institutions and civil society building. And I grew up in Ottawa, born and raised. And again, I was really lucky to have a sense of a world that was so much bigger than Ottawa. And it was so connected to my family in Bolivia, my parents' work and living in places around the world, and dinner conversations that were filled with stories on liberation theology and the work of Latin American revolutionaries and really thinking about um, what what does it mean to have a strong civil society and why is that important, and what does it mean to be building and developing our communities and entrenching the values and the struggle of social justice. And so that was kind of uh, what motivated me early on. And I think, like a kid who does what their parents do when they, oh, I want to be my parents when I grow up. I kind of thought of that as a sense of the other, right? The sense of like, oh, overseas, international development, community development. And so the first couple of years of my career were abroad. And I had this moment where there was a significant paradigm shift for me. I was sitting in Afghanistan with a group of women. At that time, it was under the time of the Taliban. And I was sitting there and I was sharing with them what December 6th meant to me and talking to them about the Montreal massacre as over the years of a kid who had kind of gone through that time period, which was very formative to me in my own identity and activism as a young woman. And sitting there and explaining the impact that it had, what it meant for our country, talking about domestic violence and gender-based violence in Afghanistan with women under the Taliban. And they kind of looked at me and they were kind of like, one, those problems exist elsewhere. And kind of seeing this issues across the spectrum of the world and that sense of solidarity across the world. And then the second question is like, well, why are you working on those issues here and not there? And already I had been going through, there's nothing like, being abroad and all of a sudden having all the exoticism of being the expat and all of that stuff, of this role of what is my local legitimacy? Like, where do I get my accountability, my legitimacy to work and speak on these issues? So pretty much I said, I'm going to go back to Canada and I'm going to understand what does community development look like as my vocation in my place of origin. And so I moved to Toronto basically because I didn't want to live in Ottawa for a range of reasons. That's like different thing. And I've spent the last 20 years I think building that local legitimacy, trying to understand the systems and structures of what does community development look like, what are the systems and structures that entrench inequity and oppression and poverty in our communities, and what are the lever points and possibilities for me and for the institutions that I get to work with and the organizations to address that. And I think hopefully build a local legitimacy and a credibility on those issues that kind of stead me well of 20 years of working on these things and thinking about my commitment to community as a place-based commitment to the city of Toronto. And And that's kind of who I am, aside from this amazing mother of this, I'm amazing mother, this mother of this amazing child and this partner. You know, I think I'm from my family, my faith, my friends, all of these things are very much layered on to who I am and not limited to time and space nor linear. And so, yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I live and breathe these issues, and it's vocational. I think it's very that word vocation of committed. My spirit's committed to how do I make my worlds better, and how do I make them uh, more just and more equitable, and how do I name and respond to oppression that I see.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. You epitomize a credible messenger. And this is
Mhm.
more than vocational. Since the day I met you, you've been doing this work with such commitment, passion, and authenticity. So once again, I just applaud your leadership and the fact that we're still on this journey. And
We're still on this journey together, Victor.
absolutely, family, absolutely. So my next question, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious right now, or what's keeping you up at nights?
Well, I mean, so what inspires me? I mean, I'm really inspired by the work of migrants, like the work of migrant workers who are being, you know, uh, scapegoated and framed, and yet their struggle on the front lines, like low wage workers and migrant workers, inspire me because they are organizing and struggling and fighting, and it's a long journey, and they are winning. Like if it wasn't for low wage workers and their work on organizing and their activism on multi levels of government, we wouldn't have minimum wage pegged to inflation. You know, we'd still be. And so it's those things of like, we're now at 1655. Is that enough? Definitely not. But it's the work to get there, and not only to get the wins, but to hold the wins. And that inspires me. Similarly, like migrant workers who, you know, work 2, 3 jobs, have tied permits, are struggling, and yet they're out there on the streets talking about their rights, talking about the humanity and dignity of everyone, and reminding us on how we have to see the humanity and dignity of everyone, and not just have it nuanced by, where you were born. Like for me, that's really inspiring because that's the work, and that's the effort. And if they can find, after working 2 jobs, they can find time to keep on organizing and struggling. I find that, I find that to me one of the most inspiring things, and a reminder of the long journey of this work, that this isn't a 6-month win or a horizon of 1 year, that these are issues that our low wage workforce have been struggling and fighting for decades. And that I think is really important right now, where it can feel hard and challenging because things are really dire. And I'm really fortunate to work at a place at Metcalf where we have, part of that is like the hopeful visions. What you gotta have hopeful visions. That's what justice looks like. We got to keep on working forward. And so for me, that inspires me. The organizers, the activists, and the people who are fighting for their rights and the rights of others on long-term systemic issues, and reminding us of what solidarity needs to look like.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We actually just finished our quarterly solidarity working group meeting about an hour ago. We had over 90 participants. And when you talk about hopeful visions, we need hope right now in these times of deep polycrisis and polarization. And one of my elders always, one of my elders from the West, Cornell West, funny enough, he says that love is justice, what justice looks like in public. So I feel like that
Mhm.
hopeful vision piece is absolutely beautiful and absolutely timely and needed. And the last thing I'll mention around what you just shared, one of my colleagues, I'm Jean-Marc from PFC yesterday, he said something remarkably insightful that was beautiful. He said, we don't have the luxury to despair. And I think that I agree. When we think about liberation theology and some of the things that our ancestors, our elders, our parents that struggle with, like we have to be hopeful, or
Yeah.
else these crises will just weigh on us. And there's no way that we can create and innovate or address any of these very pervasive challenges. So once again, I applaud you and I appreciate your leadership and your candor. So my next question, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and how are you and your colleagues working to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
So, I mean, I think the challenges are how to keep a strong civil society. Like for me, I think there's different approaches to philanthropy and the way that one thinks social change happens. But I think it's really important that uh, that philanthropy helps underpin civil society because civil society needs to balance the state and the market. And that if we think about our society as being these three legs of a stool of the state moving forward on their strategies and policies and the market and private sector on that, we need to make sure, and again, that framing around the solidarity economy and the social economy, that civil society is robust and well sustained and maintained and growing the pie because their leadership needs to be part of that solution equation. And so for me, that keeps me up at night because that's a lot to ask for civil society right now. And I think part of that is how to support the sovereignty and the self-determination of civil society, how to keep the solidarity and rooted in love and growing the pie. And it's tough when, you know, I'm so privileged. I work in private philanthropy. I come into these questions and I have to come in with a frame of abundance because I represent abundance. And yet there's always more good ideas than and more like innovation than there's resources for. And so part of that is you know, trying to bridge what I see as the challenge of like forward horizon thinking and looking towards vision and change and transformation while also being really grounded in action today and making a difference in our current economy and making our current economy more just. And obviously one wants to like, you know, dismantle it all and break it all down, but you know, what does that mean for the current people who toil without compassion and without compensation, or their compensation is so not what it is real to survive? And so, what does it mean to center and root that immediacy in our immediate action and strategy and policy work, while also keeping our eyes on the horizon of transforming our structures, which we know is a long journey as well. And so it's like straddling these two temporal states of time of the present and the future and straddling you know, moving the deck chairs on a sinking ship versus, you know, like those are hard things for organizations. And then of course, you know, these intersection of before, you know, and listening to this across like everywhere. Before it was like if you could get a good job, then things would be okay. But now housing, food, employment, like all of these things are like the environment, all these things are in polycrisis. And so we do need to be transformative, but it also puts a lot of pressures on organizations, leaders, let alone the people who are experiencing the implications of these oppressive systems. And so yeah, that kind of keeps me up at night because I'm like, what can I do? And how do I use the power that I'm part of? And how do I use it? And so, you know, in the question of like, what do I do? I think part of that is knowing that successful social change for me is like a trifecta of, you know, organizational capacity, personal individual leadership and vision, and clarity and potency of strategy. And you kind of need to have those three things working in tandem. Sometimes, you know, like Meatloaf song, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but you know, it's really how do those three things work? And there's lots of really good ideas out there, but they need the other two components, or lots of really good organizations out there, but they need the other two components. And so working over the long term and over the long haul of knowing, you know, the grants and the organizations we work with, we have 10-year relationships with on some of them, you know, and they start with visions that like the land trust movement, that at first they're like, come together, but we don't have land. And now, the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust has 80 units. But that took 10 years. And I think that's part of the work. The minimum wage campaign took, 10 to 15 years and keeps going. And being able to keep our eye out and understand policy, and in a way, I talked to a friend and I said it was kind of like the regifting of policy sometimes, where people are like, look what we've done. And I'm like, you already announced that policy. That's not new, or the regifting of policy, like regifting of the loot bag, where you're like, I was the one that fought for that policy. And now you're telling me that back to appease it. Like, we've got to make sure we hold our leaders accountable, and we hold the state. Because sometimes we've had really good relationships with the state, and what does it mean when we don't? And it requires, and so for me, that's what's really important, that civil society is robust and that we focus on action. We understand that process is important, but we don't get lost in process towards a forward thinking approach, because we need to make sure we make change now to be accountable to the communities that we work and serve. And I think part of that for me is understanding who our organization's constituencies, because that's the credibility and the economic democracy that's required in this work. That it's not just I have a cool idea. It's like I work with community, and that's what gives it credibility and community centeredness versus individual aspiration, which I think is like the heart of civil society.
I couldn't agree more. And the way you've always wielded power as an individual, even collectively, has always been that of grace, mercy, compassion, empathy, and intentionality. So when you spoke of the potency of strategy, I was like say that again. You know what I mean? I couldn't agree more. At SETC, we always speak about the three R's: relationships, resources, and reciprocity. And like we see that in the long game. One of our colleagues was talking about the 40 years of work around childcare, and it finally like making it. So when you talk about the Parkdale initiative and 10 years of investment and collaboration and deep work, now land 80 units. When you talk about the minimum wage work, so once again, systemic transformation is sometimes incremental, but in the same breath, sometimes it's huge impact and accomplishments by a few folks that had that hopeful vision. So once again, I'm just inspired by everything you share, all the jewels so far. So my next question, do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work that you'd like to share with us?
So I mean, I think, key priorities, the the language that's really resonating with me is around economic dignity, because I think and because I think that is a form of solidarity that people understand across uh economic brackets. People understand a sense of insecurity, and when you talk to people there, everyone's like, this is my experience, and if this is what it's like for me, imagine XYZ. And that this idea of like economic dignity, where people should be able to have jobs that enable that you can be with your families and not just send money home to them, but that you can be part of, I think, what makes us people, that we're social creatures. We come from community, and how can we be part of the communities and the families that we're in? That's a component of economic dignity, that we have opportunities and choices and chances, and that we're not, doomed to one station in life, and that you can't change that. And this idea that we should be able to like work without exploitation and oppression, that it's the work that we've done with migrant workers, live-in caregivers, migrant students, the conditions that they work under. Like, Canada should be ashamed of the low wage economy that we're exploiting. And that, to me, when we talk about economic dignity, that is something that resonates, I think, across communities, which I think is really important for solidarity. And I'd say, like, it's interesting when you were speaking earlier, like, for me, when I think about the frameworks and things that help me in both my work and in what inspire me and what are my priorities, over COVID, in I'd start going for walks around the same block, more or less, to my son's school. And outside, they had done this mosaic of the seven grandfather teachings. And I started asking myself, as this framework and like in my grant making and my work, I'm like, how do these things manifest in my life, in my choices? Which grants do I have that have bravery, that are seeking truth and respect? Or how am I showing humility and how do I show up in that? And I think that those are the things for our strategies to be like, how do the things that we know make good lives and good communities, how does this manifest in our work? And how do we center that? Because then you can figure out, what policies enable it. But I don't know whether we're having those conversations about, the values and the visions that need to underpin our societies and our communities for right now and where we are and where we want to go. And I think, again, as we've talked earlier, it's easy to silo us up and have us compete against one another. That's what neoliberalism and capitalism wants us to do, to fight amongst each other versus see what we have in common and the struggles that unite us. And I think those have to be rooted in humility and love and bravery, and mutual respect with even those that we might not agree with the policy that they think, but it's helpful when we know that we're both foreseeing ourselves to fight for the same thing of economic dignity. Like that to me unites. And then we can unpack, what does that look like? And why do some people say it's for whom and why not others? And yet if we root it in our humanity is not divided by one's passport, and that's something that kind of I catch myself in, and I continue to grow and be challenged. And I love learning from the people I get to work with, because that's hard to kind of constantly like not think about it abstract, but actually think about what does it mean in your everyday work. So yeah, so those are some of the things that are focusing on. And I think also helping the long journey. There's lots of things that are happening. And the most important thing for me in community development that I've learned and in philanthropy is this isn't linear, and this doesn't happen in 2 years and 3 years. And so you've got to be committed for the long haul, and therefore be really specific and clear and intentional about what are the journeys that you're going on, because you can't go on all journeys. And so the where you want to commit is really important, and how you make that assessment for those choices is something that I spend a lot of time reflecting on.
That's incredible and remarkably insightful. One's humanity should not be defined by their passports. I wish I had like a Zoom plugin for like hearts and flowers and like I don't even know what to like show up on the screen while you're speaking. Um, because I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. So yeah, once again, thank you for your leadership and all those jewels and actionable insights. So my next question, how do you feel about the future of philanthropy right now? Are you pessimistic? Are you optimistic? Do you have hopeful visions? How do you feel?
Um, I mean, I'm a hopeful vision kind of person. So I feel like what's great is I think we're asking great questions, and I'm a kind of person that I don't expect us to have the answers. That's part of the journey, and that's part of the more you listen to more people, your answer continues to move. But having the sense of the direction of where you want to go, I kind of frame it of like, uh, we'll figure out what fills a suitcase, but first let's figure out where we want to go. And so I think philanthropy is asking really good questions and interrogating itself and being held accountable in a way that it hasn't been. And I think that manifests itself in different ways. And and I think again, part of that tension is we want philanthropy to work on systems and systems change, but we also know that philanthropy is needed to fill the day-to-day gaps of, the things that are insufficiently funded by government and by the other things. And so how do you straddle and hold that and work in collaboration to work as a system? But I think philanthropy is asking good questions. I think there's interesting new waves of leadership, building and mentorship happening. And I also think like philanthropy is being detethered from only just big forms of wealth, right? And so we're learning and we're being reminded that we have different models of what giving and reciprocity and mutual aid has been for centuries. We have models to learn from, and to be reminded that social capital has been alive and well in low-income communities. That was survival of how you do that. And so I'm hopeful for philanthropy, but I'm also wanting to make sure that we don't feel so good about ourselves and give ourselves a pat in the back, because part of that is continuing to do the work and to continue to be held accountable for the work that we do.
Ashe, Ashe, thank you. So my second last question, what is your ultimate goal and what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
So what does success look like? I mean, I think for me, success looks like the organizations I work with have strategic clarity, and they have the resources and the supports to advance that. I mean, there's so much stuff that success for me can't, obviously we're working towards a more just, equitable, healthy, and creative society as a foundation. That's, Metcalf's mission and vision. But I think part of that is that we're working on using the resources that we have for that strategic clarity, and knowing that it's an ecosystem. It's not on the shoulder of one leader or one organization, and it's the plurality of ideas and actions and leadership that come together and grow the pie and make it the sum of the parts. And that's how that to me is success, a really dynamic, rich, provocative ecosystem of this work, and that we see our work defined by our vision and not defined by our funding sources, that we're not defined by where we get our funding, where we see solidarity and similarity based on our vision. And that to me is success. And that also I constantly do the work to make sure that I don't center what I think is success, but I center them, and I step back and we've talked about this over to the time, like power is different. Like now, power shifts based on the different tables that I'm at. Sometimes I hold the power, and sometimes I'm very much not the power. And so that in itself is a really interesting thing to think about in philanthropy and what success is. How do I constantly decenter myself and my foundation in the work that we do while still being accountable for it, and still recognizing that, I mean, for me, I play in my role in philanthropy, I'm more than just a funder. At my very best with the organization's work, I'm a strategic thought partner. I'm a strategic brainstormer. I think at my core, I'm a community practitioner, but the gift that I offer is being a community strategist. And so that is not necessarily what people want in a grant making relationship, but at our very best, that's what I think, how I share the sight lines of the amazing leaders that I've worked with, past, present, the projects where we can say, oh, I remember that from 2008 and what came through. And then you're like 2022, I remember that kind of question. And this is what we've learned and why. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but like, these are the kind of questions that I have as we go through it. And so that to me is what success looks like.
Ashe, I couldn't agree more. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Um, so I think in like the broad sense, my closing action, I think a lesson that I've approached my life has been think about my career and my choices as tools in my toolbox. And there's lots of places where one can learn different tools and to pick them up and to see that not one thing has to be everything, but it's a chance to learn and to prototype and to try out different parts and find out where our gifts and skills are. And then I think the other one in general is that this, for me, this work inherently requires community, and it's not doing things on your own. We have to push that, push back against that kind of, I'll just do it on my own. It's faster. I'll just do it on my own. I love my own idea. It's like, it's about being in community, because civil society has to be communal and plural. And that's the pushback against individualism that makes it like center ourselves, that we need to be connected to things. And so my call to action is, how are people connected to their communities? Who are their constituencies that they're part of and that they feed into and that they're accountable to? Because I think we have to think about our work in relationship to others.
Ashe, Madasi, pa. Thank you so much for all that you do for so long. I'm not gonna date you or date. I'm not gonna do it.
I age well. I age well,
Yes,
Richard.
you too. Emily, you have no idea how much I appreciate the time you invested with us today. The fact that we're still on this journey together, your thought leadership, the practitionership, the community strategy work that you do, the work that you do as a mother, as a family, how your faith intersects with your work, your vocation in this work. It's just inspiring. It's always been inspiring. The evolution is even more inspiring. And yeah, I was looking forward to this all week. And yeah, you didn't disappoint and you never have. And I don't think you ever will. So I just really appreciate all that you stand for, all that you represent, and all that you bring to this work and all that you bring to this world. And as always at SETC, we close the way we began by giving thanks to our creator, by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation, all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, fam. I so appreciate you.
Blessings.